Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Got a fun show for you today. Tarquin Cooper reached out a couple weeks ago. You know him from the color for the Red Bull X-Alps. He's been doing that for the last few years, the kind of main commentating. He was commentating in this year's film as well, and he and I have been friends for a long time. He's a budding pilot. I think that'd be the right word, but he's super into it and chasing it now a bit, and had a really cool adventure right after the race this year. He went and sailed in the Fastnet, and it was a massive storm kind of compared to the 1979 craziness where all those boats went down and lots of loss of life in the 79 one, not this time around, but I think he talks about that in this episode. Over 100 boats pulled out because it was pretty wild out there. They had a pretty wild experience and adventure as well. But he reached out because he thought it'd be really fun to talk about the kind of behind the scenes. As you all know, I was invited over to cover the race this year as well with him. We were kind of partnering on the color, and I was meant to be in the air every day and doing a lot of live broadcasting, which I was in the air every day. We were mostly successful with getting it live, but many times not, just because of the cell coverage and the equipment, and we were all learning very new gear. I also had a pretty wild incident of landing in a tree, a very, very high tree. So we cover that. Pretty amusing story. Well, that was a little scary actually at the time, but that all worked out pretty well. And yeah, we just thought it'd be fun to talk about the behind the scenes stuff. Who was really impressive this year. The speed of the race, of course, was crazy. I know I talk a lot about the Red Bull X-Alps because it's a favorite topic of mine. And we just had Paul Guschelbauer on the show. So hopefully this will keep you entertained, even if you aren't into the Red Bull X-Alps. And wanted to mention, we just put out another bonus episode. This is kind of 201, the second version for the pilots. The first one with Caliph was the first bonus episode we did, was really meant for pilots that were just leaving the nest. This is after a few hundred hours, so more, maybe almost at the level of what my book is aimed at. So kind of intermediate advanced pilots who are figuring it out, trying to decode the invisible. And he has a lot of really fantastic ways of teaching and articulating this level of flying. We had a lot of fun with this. Everyone has access to the bonus material. You automatically do when you're a subscriber and you contribute to the show. But if you don't or you can't, then just let me know and I'll set you up with a lifetime subscription. All we've ever asked for is $1 a show. But I know many of you that's a stretch, and that's totally fine. This will always be ad-free, and it will always be free. And for those of you who do support the show, thank you very much. Appreciate that. But you can find that on the website, that bonus stuff. And if you don't have access, like I said, just shoot me an email, and we'll make it all so you do forever. Enjoy this really fun talk with Tarquin Cooper, and we will be banded together for the 25 event, most likely, unless I get... I'm still thinking about racing, but right now this is the plan, is to do that again. And I've got much better equipment this time around. Got it all sorted, so A, I don't land in trees because of camera gear messing me up, and B, it should all work really well in terms of bringing you a lot more coverage from kind of behind the scenes and especially from the air. Should be a lot of fun. Cheers, enjoy the show. Tarquin, look at us, looking at each other again like we were in the race. How you doing, man?
I'm awesome, Gavin. It's great to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Things have been a little frantic. It was frantic for the race, and it's been a little frantic, but in the house now. And I went for my first little hike and fly in ages the other day, and we've had a really nice fall. But it was good to catch up with you via email, and I'm glad you suggested we do this. You had a different experience than most do after the X-Alps. Most people just go to relax, and you went on a boat and got slammed in a storm. What happened there?
Yeah, so I kind of jumped from the frying pan into the fire. So I had this big thing on the diary, which was to do the Fastnet race. which is a really iconic offshore race, 700 nautical miles from England all the way out the channel to the southern tip of Ireland, around a rock there. And so that was a few weeks after the race, and I was crewing for a friend's yacht. And on the opening night, it was pretty spicy. It was a force 8 gale, and at one point I was below deck. It was about, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm bailing. We're taking on a lot of water. I'm bailing. At the same time, I'm being sick because everyone was sick. There were 7 of us, and everyone was throwing up. I mean, it was just, and then a fire breaks out. So it just suddenly smoke just starts billowing out of this cupboard. And what had happened was we were taking on water, and that was getting to the batteries. And then I remembered I'd done my sea survival course, but I couldn't remember which fire extinguisher you're supposed to use for electric. So I was like, wait, is this the right fire extinguisher? But in the end, we solved it because we tacked. So we were heeling quite over. So we were on one side. And so by changing direction, changing our direction against the wind, we were able to lift the other side out of the water. So meanwhile, also...
Didn't 100 boats or something cancel before it even got going or something?
Yeah, 82 boats pulled out that night. Yeah. So
I mean, was this the most comparable race to the famous one? I mean, there's legend stories. It wasn't at 79, the Fastnet, where they had all the boats go down.
Yeah, I mean,
that right?
Fastnet, it's a little bit like the North Face of the Eiger. It's got a kind of legendary cult status, partly because of this terrible tragedy that happened in 1979, where I think 20 or so sailors died. I mean, but everything has changed so much since then. I mean, back then they had, some boats didn't even have any communications equipment. They just had a long wave radio at best. A weather forecast was something you got once every 12 hours. The kind of rescue, your lifeboat that you got into wasn't much better than a kind of kid's rubber dinghy. Now, everything's so much more advanced now. Technology, the weather forecasting is so much better. I mean, it's now mandatory that you have to do a sea survival course. So you actually have to learn, how to get into one of these life rafts. And the one thing that you learn on that is that you step up into your life raft. In other words, you get into it at the very, very last minute when you stay on your boat as long as possible. As long as it's floating, you stay on it, and you only get in that life raft when it's the only option.
Yeah, you don't want to leave where you got all your food and all your stuff and a water maker and all the boats, even when sinking, are better than a life raft. Life raft is the last ditch. It's like our reserve, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
the last ditch effort.
Yeah. But it was fun.
Well,
it was a wild adventure.
I bet. And you've been into sailing for a while, or is this a passion?
Not really. This was a classic kind of conversation with my neighbor, and I sort of mentioned that I was into sailing, and he sort of said, "Oh, great! I need crew." So I kind of been winging it slightly.
It's gonna be gnarly.
Yeah. I kind of winging it a little bit. But no, it's all good.
And you guys finished?
Yeah, we finished. Yeah, it went well. We did pretty okay in our class. We weren't out to win.
Yeah.
And what's amazing, after this massive, storm, big sort of 4 or 5 meter swells, 2 days later, we were in the middle of the Irish Sea, and it was flat calm, absolutely flat calm. And of course, at that point, you're praying for wind, and then the phrase, be careful what you wish for, because another storm rolled through. It was an exciting time, but I was glad to make it onto terra firma actually when I got off the boat.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, fires are never fun, and storms aren't fun. It's interesting. All the sailing I've done, I've been around the world twice. You get more. I was a lot less worried about storms early on. I got more and more and more humble and more afraid as time went on, which is the opposite of, say, paragliding or something. As as you get more experience, you get better, it all becomes more manageable. And with sailing, I just got more and more scared all the time of the seas, because when you start fighting that stuff in the beginning, it's novel. This is a storm. I've read the books, and it's kind of this fight to survive. And as time goes on, even with, like you're talking about GPS, back when I got into the day, it was, when I worked on fishing boats up in Alaska in my late teens, it was all Loran. We didn't have GPS. My captain lost a ship the year before I got up there in the Bering Sea, and it was still no joke. But anyway, the storms are just scary, and you feel very, very, very small at sea, regardless of the boat you're on. And yeah, I just got more intimidated. Of course, I got more experience, and so I knew how to deal with it better, and how to reef, and how to understand, and basically not go out there if I could, if something was coming, rather than, yeah, let's go out and battle this storm. But sometimes you still just get caught out. The funny thing about sailing is it's way harder typically to do something like the fast net. When you're coastal, it's the same as paragliding. The weather changes constantly and really fast, and sometimes really violently. Whereas when you're being offshore is way more cruisy. Typically, if you're doing it right and you're going in the right season, you've got the current working with you and the wind working with you, and the only nightmare really is a squall, and they're very brief and very fast. And so it's really more, circumnavigating New Zealand or circumnavigating Ireland or going around in the English Channel, that's much more difficult because you've got traffic and storms and things change really fast, and it's much more demanding sailing than being offshore. Being offshore is actually pretty easy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing in the channel. It's a major shipping lane, and you're seeing these huge
Yeah.
tankers, and you're looking at the green light and the red light, and you're trying to remember which one means it's gone past me, and the eyes play tricks with you. And but it's quite funny when we
Yeah.
finished the race, we had a little bit of a penalty because the Coast Guard had tried to get a hold of us during the race, and our radio wasn't working. And we the reason for that is someone's AIS device, their emergency thing was going off. We didn't realize it,
Oh,
and so we got our knuckles wrapped. The Coast Guard, while I was trying to put out the fire, were also trying to call us, and I tried to get back to them and say, no, all's well,
right.
but they couldn't hear me. So we nearly got a penalty for being out of contact. But in the end, it was
Mm,
okay. But it reminded me of during the Rebel X-Alps when Kinga got her yellow card for being out of contact. So that
right.
amused me a lot. Yeah, for going a
Yeah.
little bit.
She was
But
quite
that
upset about
happens.
that too. I didn't realize that until kind of after, but she's, sounds like she had a good night and kind of bivvied, but I
Yeah,
probably
I
need to
think I
get her
think
on the show. But yeah,
I think something got lost in translation on that one. I don't really know
I think so
exactly,
too.
what happened, but she was just out there. I spoke to her the other day. She just had a really great adventure, and I think, yeah, just went off grid for a little bit.
Well, it's good. It's good timing that we're talking because the film just came out, which I enjoyed. It was done quite a bit differently than in the past. I mean, it still really mostly showed the leaders, which is always, it's always tricky to who are you going to show. And but I liked the talking heads. I liked the explanation, and that's really what we were trying to do. I was so thankful that you put me on the team this year, and the feedback I got from the fans were that this is great. Now we understand what's going on, and we're going to pair this, I think, into future editions in 2025. What a lot of people were telling me is they want to know why Tarquin is in this position, why Gavin is this position, what's going on, and it was interesting. I'm sure way more frantic than in past episodes because I don't know about you, but I was driving all night every night. It was impossible to keep up with these guys and girls, and it was just frantic. It was, yeah, I thought the race was really frantic because I have experience with that, but God, it's frantic what we do as well. And I'm sure that was driven a lot by just the speed of things this year. But I think next time we'll have to almost have a side show of what we're doing because it was, we would just pop up and we'd be in Tracy May, or we'd pop up and be at one of the turn points. People, well, why are you there? What are you doing there? What's going on?
Yeah, there would be a lot of swearing in my van. It's like, fuck, where's
Yes.
it? You know, what? Where am I going to go do now? And sometimes taking a wrong turn, and I'd end up completely in the wrong direction. I mean, you had this great idea, Gavin, that that we should have a little GPS unit on us so that the fans can see where we are. And I'm a little
Yeah.
part of me is like, yeah, maybe. because like my worst during the last race, I think it was after Lermoos, where we plugged it in for the into the Google, into the sat nav, and I planned to go into the Alberg Valley to follow the next phase of the race. But in the end, I kind of then buried myself in the laptop to try and follow the stuff. And then we ended up driving into the Autobahn route, the long way round via, into,
Burn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically
Yeah.
we were on the
Way too far
highway.
north.
And then suddenly I realized I got to go live. And then I'm in the middle of some random farmer's field trying to make it look as hilly as possible. just completely in the wrong place. But that happens from time
There's
to
a
time.
lot of that, isn't there? I mean, there was a time on the Col du Petit Saint Bernard. I was up there most of the day. Paul Guscherbauer got in the night before. That was right after Damien Lacaze had his epic flight around Dent d'Oche and made it all the way around in one go. And then the next day, I basically spent the day there just capturing the athletes coming in and leaving. And Tom de Dorlado was one of the last in that day. I think he was 16th at the time, but he was having a heck of a race. He was in really good spirits. And because I could see that he was probably going to be the last one in, he was really racing to get in and get up off the hill. And he said, well, hey, where'd everybody else go? And I said, well, everybody else went, this aspect, which was, I guess, to the west. But, then it was late in the day. So it was where they were taking off earlier in the day to get the east aspect sun. And so, but he said, well, I'm going to go there. That's the fastest one. And as we were hiking up together, I thought, I don't know if this is going to work. The sun's really the other angle now, but we were committed at that point. And so we launched, and immediately it looked like we were just going to land literally back where he'd started. We were barely going to make the Col because it's quite flat up there for quite a long ways. We sort of starts diving down to the Aosta Valley, but we both saved it. I was above him and filming him, and I was live, and this is amazing. But I was doing the live Facebook thing, and I had to be live with you at 5 p.m. That was our daily deal, and for the evening show. And so, we're digging out, and it's rowdy, and it's lee side, and I'm with Tom, and I'm not helping him, but I know he's happy to have another pilot in the air because it was really quite rowdy and we were really low. I mean, we just had to kind of kept squirting off the pass to get to where we'd have more terrain to work. And we finally got to the bottom where there's the intersection of the Aosta and the stuff going up towards, the Dufour Spitz and Monte Rosa and all that. And we're digging out, and I'm looking at my watch going, I got to be on the ground. I got to do a show with Tarquin. I can't be doing this. I can't just be flying. And it's so funny how often that happens where you're just, oh, no, I have to land and do a show. Oh, but I want to fly.
Gavin,
it's quite a hysterical bouncing around.
So just rewind a bit. I mean, what were your perceptions going into the race? You must have had a preconceived idea of how the race was done, and what kind of changed in your mind? Was it what was it like on the other side?
Well, one, it was a lot of fun. I have to be honest. I think the athletes often have a view of the race organization that's maybe not totally positive, I guess I should say. There's a lot of marketing, and there's the sponsorship, and there's all the things that make the race go. And as an athlete, we all understand that. We all understand that you have to have all that to make such a big operation operate, right? But I think there's often a viewpoint that there's just too much emphasis on the marketing side and the filming side and the cameras and all the things. And working from the other side, it gave me, I love the whole race even more. I guess it's, to see how hard everybody on now this side, now that I'm on the Zoom side of the race, is working, and how much they care and how much passion there is, and how fucking hard it is. It's hard. I was amazed with how hard it was. And again, I guess a lot of that's maybe the pace, but I don't know. Maybe that doesn't back off. I mean, the easy out would just be, okay, I'm not going to race off to that. I'm just going to cover what what I'm here doing. But nobody does that from the Zoom side. Everybody's just, we got to get more. We got to work. We got to get it. There's all this exciting stuff going on. And so it was very eye-opening for me. And yeah, like I said, it just makes me love the race even more. It was, it was very cool to be part of the talks before the race even started. How is this going to work, and how are we going to handle the safety, and how are we going to handle the communications? And I guess I knew already that it was complicated and it was big and it was a lot of moving parts, but I didn't really understand the depth of it and how really truly complicated it is. They always say, I used to work in media for NBC, and we covered this big golf race in Tahoe every year. And they always, this sounds crazy, but apparently from a media perspective, golf is one of the hardest things to cover because there's 18 holes, there's a ton of different cameras, and color, in other words, you and I, are the squawk box into our ear while we're trying to go live and talk. So that's Esteban for you and I, is 18 different, there's all these different cameras and there's all these different things, and they're trying to make it look very natural. And the guy running the camera, okay, we're going to go to green, we're going to purple, we're going to camera number 5, the live show. So Esteban for us is one of the highest paid positions in NBC because it's so complicated. That's golf. Can you imagine? I mean, so now let's take 1,200 kilometers in a straight line with 32 different athletes spread all over the joint. And, it's amazing how complicated it is. So to try
Yeah.
to keep up with all that was really fun and really hard and really complicated. And I'm just really excited. My camera gear, all that stuff we were dealing with, that was a system we learned literally right before the prologue, and we didn't really figure it out until day 7. And so that'll be really cool to use that stuff properly and
I
get
think
me in the
we've
air more and report on it.
I think this was we really tried to do things differently this year, and I think much more focus on kind of on live output, on the social media stuff. Also, it's nice to hear your comments on the documentary. I think that's gone down quite well. We've really tried to do
Yeah.
things, do things a bit more, in a new way. But what a lot of people think is, there's an assumption because it's Red Bull, there's just tons of money and we can do the hell we want. And actually, Red Bull is effectively just the title sponsor. Um, you know,
Mm.
there isn't, there's not so much flexibility that you would imagine. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, I think some people would be surprised. It's basically you and me and a guy back in the office trying to pull it all together with a little bit of help from maybe one or two other people.
Yeah.
But definitely, I think we've proved that it works. And I think the idea of getting you up in the air, filming live, I mean, looking ahead to the future, I mean, it would be amazing if we could put live cameras on the athletes themselves. Now let's go and see where Damian is. Let's see where Kriegel is. But I think this is definitely the way forward, and we've proved that this works.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what we're still missing in a sense is just the weather. If we could somehow have, and we capture that when I'm up in the air, but there was there was a lot of PTSD for me in this one because the 4 races I've done, there was always some pretty hairy weather. Not so much in 2019. That was just stability in the heat and stuff. But to see what those guys were flying in from Col du Petit Saint Bernard through kind of the Italian side of the Alps, going through the lakes, on the live weather cams that day, it was gusting over 60K an hour. It's just so far from recreational flying that I still don't know that we're able to show that to the audience. To be in my position that day, flying from the Dufour Spitz towards Domodossola, it was just starting to ramp up and that was the day I landed in the tree. And that was not because of the weather. That was because wing damage, which maybe we'll talk about. But it was really, really gnarly conditions. Maxime was practically in tears at the end of that day. It was, and he and I talked about that after the race. And Zellum say it just the ridiculous amount of exposure and risk that the pilots are taking, especially. And but making it look really good. Damien Lacaze flew 11 hours and 20 minutes that day, but it's
but
only the
actually,
really experienced pilots that understand that, to be in the air for 11 hours and 20 minutes and only go 267K says something. It was brutal and really rowdy. And so, I think if there's some way to overlay and show some of that is, I think would just, my mom wouldn't understand, but the pilots who watch the race would understand.
yeah,
And
it's
I
funny.
think that's what's really exciting about it.
I had a very similar conversation with Damian Lacaze just a couple of days ago, and he was talking about that. Just if there was a way to, like it, to go back to sailing in the Vendée Globe race, you as a viewer, you can put the overlays on there on the weather map, so you can see exactly the storm as it's rolling in. Or to have airspaces, for example, on live tracking. I mean, that would be an amazing feature, so that you could see why, you might not understand why, as an athlete approached Innsbruck, why they've gone off in a really bizarre direction, and the airspace might explain that. But yeah, Damian, interestingly, he actually said that, that big 11-hour flight wasn't that big a deal for him. That's not the moment that he's most proud
Really?
of. It was kind of,
Wow.
for him, it was more the case, well, of course I was in the air for 11 hours because there weren't any turn points that day. It was so I just stayed flying.
Yeah.
It's not his longest flight he's ever done. I think he's done over 300 kilometers, but he said his proudest flight, I think, was from the up to towards Mont Blanc. He took Nice to Mont Blanc. He did an interesting line that really worked out. But again, to go back to what you were saying about when things are getting rowdy towards the end of the race, he was saying he got completely pinned, and to have any kind of penetration, he had to go on full bar, but then he started sinking, and he was, and that wasn't working out. So he'd come off the bar to climb, and then get, pinned again. And he just said it. And Kriegel, meanwhile, was just in his. This is the kind of stuff where Kriegel's in his element. But in the end, Damian said that he came and landed, and he was lucky that the wind actually was at ground level was pretty okay. But and I think Maxime also landed, and that was, where he really had a rethink about his priorities. But it does seem in those situations, Kriegel just enters a different zone. He's just finds just comes into his own, really, doesn't he? And if there was a way to tell that, the problem is if you interview Kriegel, he just sort of he'd talk about it like it's just a normal flight.
I do what I have to do.
Yeah. It was.
I mean, we saw that in the 2021 race too, where, he and Maxime landed within feet of one another down in the Valais, and Maxime took the southern route and he went north, and we all went, what the hell's Kriegel doing? And then the next day, he talks about, I don't think it was that ferny. I mean, the Fern was just dumping. I was there going the other way into the Fish Valley. It was just crazy. And for him, it's just, this is what you got to do. And, to pull these leads off and get ahead of that kind of talent, just, he's really in a different stratosphere.
I mean, I've never really seen the emotion on Kriegel's face, but I did see it that day. At the end of that day, meeting up with his supporter, who was Thomas Tourilat, and he was very, very stressed. He had not had a good day because he's trying to drive, he's trying to keep up with Kriegel, which on these roads, as you know, is a nightmare. Kriegel's calling up all the time saying, "What's the wind? What's the wind? What's the wind doing?" And Thomas, at the end of the day, he was just like, no media. I don't want anyone,
I'm cooked.
And he was freaked out, I think, at the end of that day. Much more than Kriegel was. But
it's really you were asking me, what some of the differences for me were. The really interesting one for me, just kind of inside in my being, was the number of times I was standing on launch with these guys, shooting and thinking, wow, I'm really not in their mindset. It's, knowing the conditions are going to be windy today, that kind of thing. And they're not even thinking about it, versus when you're not racing. I just kept thinking, I'm really grateful I don't have to go battle this, whereas if I'd been in the race, it would have been a non-issue. You you're just in that mindset and you're there. But I never got in that mindset. The only time was maybe close was flying with Ellie. That was the longest flight I had in the race. I flew about 70K with her from in the Inn Valley, just outside of Innsbruck to the Lermoos Turnpoint. It was a beautiful fly. It was great. It got a little rowdy uh, around the Zugspitze because we were in the lee. It was quite a strong north day, but she made an incredible move the night before, leaving the turnpoint in Kimsey, and was the only one, I believe, of all the athletes that flew the Inn Valley. And she passed a ton of people that night and then the next day. It was a really good move by her team. And I had never flown the Inn Valley because of that airspace. It always just made me really nervous. So I had always gone north, and all of our to Lermoos was what everybody else did. But they had a great game plan and it really worked. And she stayed in the air and she flew really well. But that was, the only time when it was kind of rowdy near the Zugspitze, I thought, yeah, I'm not in the X-Alps mindset. I don't like this. Whereas for her, I'm sure it was nothing. But it's interesting how that you snap into it and you're in it and you're fine. But
Yeah,
I
so
wasn't,
so
I
this
didn't feel that way as a camera guy.
yeah, that's really interesting you say that, because for the first time, I did my first ever hike and fly race a month ago, and I got to experience that mindset even a little bit. So it was Paul and
Yeah.
Aaron's new it's their new hike and fly race series,
Vonderberg.
Wonderbird. They got one in Murano, there's one in Salzburg, and this one was the one in the Stubaital. And it's a really fun, great event, and it's really there for kind of everyday pilots like myself. But there was a crossing that you had to do from one side of the valley to the other, and I was a little bit gung ho, and I was going across, and I came to a crossroads. Either I saw a little patch where I could land high. That was my goal, was to just land as high as possible and then continue on foot, or I was going to bottom out. And I thought maybe I could scratch around a little bit. That's probably what a more experienced pilot would have done, and eventually patience would have paid off. I'm not a very patient person, and I knew that I would have just ended up, on the valley floor. But so, what happened was this little it was a clearing in a forest, and I just thought, fuck it, I'm going for it, and I went in and landed in there, which is something that I would never do in normal recreation flying, but like it's race mode. The red mist has come down.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, someone's going to overtake me. I don't want to end up in the bottom and have to hike another 700 meters. So I was just like, hell, let's go in here. It'll be okay. And it was, there was branches everywhere. There were tree stumps. It was, yeah, really not an ideal place to land, but it was okay. I landed, bunched up, carried on the race. And that's the kind of mindset, isn't it? Of something like, just on a much bigger scale on the Red Bull X-Alps, where you just keep going. You just launch your wing and you fly in whatever conditions there are.
Yeah, one of my favorite days of the whole race was I was up on the Nissen the morning that Kriegel came up. He pulled his night pass that night before and got down into fruit again, and we all kind of thought he'd made a mistake, and because he didn't really cover much ground with the night pass, but it ended up putting him in perfect position, although he had to climb the Nissen, where most of the other pilots just climbed up a little ways out of Frutigen and then flew up there. But watching everybody come in that day, it's day God, was it only three? But they'd already covered so much ground. And watching just the tightness of the gaggle still at that point in the race. And then watching most of them at one point, Tim Alongi, Simon Oberauer, Toby Grosserbacher, there was one or two others. They landed on the top of the Nissen. I mean, it's blowing 20K. It wasn't really necessarily rowdy, but stiff enough wind, and it's blowing from the south side, so it's the opposite side that they'd come up from. So they had to kind of wing it across to the very cliff side. And, the top of the Nissen is, it's not a place you land a paraglider ever. It's just rocks. And there's this tiny little flat area. And then there's the signboard and all the people. You don't land a paraglider there. And they all did. They just come in, they'd swoop in, big wing overs. I mean, Tim Longi's doing helicopters. It was amazing. And, but they just boink right next to the signboard on the top of a 3,000-foot mountain that's it's a knife edge up there, and sign the board, pull up their wing and take off. It was seconds for all of them. Seconds. Just
and don't,
none of them were up there for more than a minute.
and don't forget, some of the athletes didn't even bother hiking. Pal Takats just walked a little bit up, launched from the hillside, thermaled his way up, and then landed. And he did that in a few places.
Yeah.
He did it near Davos as well, because he knew that was his weakness. He couldn't keep up with the guys. So, and also people are now doing that outside of Lermoos. I remember when I first, followed Red Bull X-Alps on the road 2017, everyone would hike up, do these big hour, 2-hour hikes all the way to the official launch, wherever it was, to the top of the mountain. And I can't remember who it was who first did it, but it was maybe 2019. And someone just thought, well, you know what? Just try launching off the ski slope, just this grass field just behind, just like a few hundred meters up. Yeah, behind the sun. And Kriegel also did that as well on the Titlis year, which was 2019. He did it after Davos. Yeah, he just launched, and that was actually one of the funniest things was so Kriegel, he's racing against the clock, and some little old lady stops him and says, "Oh, can you take a selfie of me? Can I do a selfie?" And she gets her phone out, and she doesn't know how to do it, and she says, like a little old lady. And Kriegel in the end just grabs it, takes the phone, says he takes it, gives it back to her, then carries on, and then ends up, being the only person to land at Titlis. That was actually quite a special highlight for me covering the race, actually, to be up there and get him there, and then spend the night on the mountain. And they kind of did a lock-in, and I probably shouldn't say this, but not me, but some people did do a little recce of the ski station and found some beers and a few other goodies. So we had quite a good night.
There's always these moments in the race where you can go, that's where he got it. Of course, it's all the little things and they really add up, but there's, that day, and I had him on the podcast about this because he and Maxime the night before leaving Lermoos were 5K difference one another. And he pulled a really interesting move that night too, where he all of a sudden they're thermaling together, huge overdevelopment, big storm. And Maxime's thinking, we can't be in the air anymore. Kriegel just top lands real quick. And Maxime's going, wow, why would you do that right now? We could just get another 10K and fly down to the bottom of the valley, which is what Maxime did. Well, Kriegel hikes up another 100 meters, relaunches, gets 5K on him, and I'm convinced, I don't know if Kriegel said that, but I'm convinced that because he worked out the math for the next day. I got to get to Davos by this time in the morning. I got to get off the hill by this time to give me a chance to get to Titlis in this time. That's good. He knows that route better than anybody. And he knows he's got to get up there by a certain time or it's going to be the snowstorm, which it was. And, so he gets to Davos and looks at his watch. I don't have time to hike any higher. I got to make this work from down here. He always talks about that sporting risk. And he's the only one that pulled that off to top land on Titlis, and he won the race that day. And so, the rest of us had to do 5,000 meters to get up there. And, that's going to wear you out. And he saved 5,000 meters of hiking, and that was it. The race was over.
That reminds me of something that Aaron said. So, as you know, everyone was coming up the glacier to the top of Titlis, hiking up through the snow, but not Aaron. Aaron just kind of clung to the rock, and he just took a sort of direct line up this sort of rocky ridge line. And when I said to Aaron, "Hey, why not hike up the snow where everyone else kind of came?" and he said, "Snow is for skiing."
Of course.
Classic Aaron.
Yeah, classic Aaron. And also a beast. Oh, but he was just out here for the Global Rescue X Red Rocks, the hike and fly race I do host and organize. And he won it last year, and he came back to defend his title. And he was sick as a dog. It was just, there was green stuff coming out of his nose and his mouth, and he was really sick. And he really had to fight harder this year than year one. He had some pretty good talent chasing him hard, including Pal Takats. But yeah, these guys are animals. That the whole point of that thing with the Nissan, the Nissan was just, it was really cool to see it from that other perspective. I would have been one of those guys flying up and landing hopefully at the top like those guys did, but just to see the talent and the skill and the to watch it from the bird's eye view was very cool. That was, I'd never, when you're in the race, you see you and you see your team and you know what you're doing, but it was very cool it was neat homework to see how other teams operate. It's fascinating.
What would be Gavin's top 3 moves? Who most impressed you?
Tim Alongi impressed me throughout. I thought that he, to have broken his back in January and to have that comeback. I mean, that must have been a moment where you go, I mean, I could see keeping it, Paul had that injury and going into the 20, was it the 19 race where he broke his
21.
leg? Or was it 21? Yeah. I mean, I can see keeping the race on the docket because it keeps you motivated. But I mean, to be in a clamshell and, to know, okay, I'm not going to be able to train at all like what I was planning on training, and coming in as a rookie. And I mean, he's obviously got amazing piloting skills, with his acro background. But I mean, what an incredible comeback. And then the consistency for a rookie. Often rookies go out pretty hard. They can do well for the first few days, but they make too many mistakes and they don't pace themselves very well often. And Tim was just consistent. I don't think he was ever out of the top 10 all the way through the race. And their team made really good decisions, and they seemed emotionally very stable. I loved their strategy. I loved that he was having a lot of fun, which you could see in Powell. Powell was having a lot of fun. Powell would be, in my mind, I loved his approach. It was radically bold. From the first day when he took off Kitzbühel, that's bold to take off before you really even know if it's working. To risk bombing out the first day and then to leave before everybody else did. I mean, I flew with the whole gaggle almost all the way to Wagrain that first day, and it was a gaggle. I mean, everybody was together except Powell, and I didn't know he wasn't with us. It was because of what I was hearing on the radio. Powell's 10K ahead. And I thought, what? That's not true. We're all together. There's Kriegel, and there's Tim, and there's Paul, and there's Aaron, and we're all here. And that must be a mistake because I wasn't watching live tracking, but I went back and watched the replay, and he was, and he kept doing it. He kept making these moves that were, I know from being in the race that I would not have personally been able to do that because the risk reward is massive, and to leave the gaggle and to do your own thing, especially early like that. I mean, you've got the gaggle to work with, and he's a really good comp pilot. He knows that that's the fast way to fly is to stay together, and he just kept doing that. He kept just going for it, and that was really cool to see because I know how hard that is to do. It's not competition flying where you bomb out, who cares? You've just blown a day, you get to maybe make it back the next day. It's the X-Alps is punishing when you make mistakes, and especially when the pace is as fast as it was this year, where you can't afford to be on the ground for 2 hours in the middle of the day. That's the difference between second and 20th in this race. And so, for him to just keep rolling the dice like that was awesome to see. I asked him about it. We put him on stage at the X Red Rocks, and I asked him about that. How did you get? Why? Where'd that come from? And I don't know that he really gave us an answer. He was just in that mindset. It was great to see.
Andy seemed like he was having the most fun. I mean, he was just fun. He was just hollering and screaming, and you could always point Pal out because he was just you could hear him a mile off. What was
cool to have. I mean, I think his approach too was that he wasn't as fit, although he is pretty fit. He's underselling that quite a bit, but that whole thing. It was kind of like Aaron in the race in 2019 when he said, I think at the end he said he walked 19 kilometers on pavement the whole race. He made it to Monaco. He had a really good race, but his approach was just, I'm going to take this as a pilot. I don't have the knee. I can't walk. So I have to fly this race. And so he had that approach that I'm going to fly it. I'm going to stay in the air. And that's what Pal did, which was really cool. It's hard to do.
Yeah, no, definitely Pal is up there, I think, with the if you were to have like an athlete of this edition, I think he would definitely be up there. Who else? I mean, it could anyone else. That's the interesting thing about this race, is that every single athlete who took part will have had epic moves, and has got incredible stories and low saves and close calls and all these kind of things. And if there's a way to try and, it's always the joke, isn't it? At the end, I remember Simon O'Brien saying that, he could write a book after every Red Bull X-Alps, and probably every athlete could write a book over each edition, because just there's always so much kind of, going on. I mean, Paul had that amazing day where he went from, I think he was like 12th or 13th, straight up to fourth place. He tagged 5 or 6 turn points in a day, from Fiche, Fiche up to
Colders, Petit Saint Bernard,
and all the way to Col de Petit Saint Bernard. Yeah.
He came in that night. You're right. He was back up in the top 5. It was incredible. And yeah, I mean, I think the personal stories, it would be so fascinating to have that. I mean, that was why John Chambers' book was so fascinating for me, because it's the only book that's ever been written about the X-Alps. But and it sounds like Kriegel maybe just put out one, but that'll be fun to read. But there's so much going on. And it was, I spent one of my favorite days was up at the hut at the Simatosa turn point, which was really nostalgic for me, because that was a turn point in 2015. And for me, and I got to see a whole, but I got there just as Paul was launching and climbing out. And so everybody else, so Michal and Rito and that whole gaggle that had left the Dufour Spitz the day before, Tom de Dorledo, and it was really cool to see them come through. And it was also just interesting to see, gosh, these guys are in 15th, 16th place, 17th place, that are, the last year they were in the top 6, but they were only, in some cases, minutes behind at that point in the race, which is a lot, they only had a couple more days to go, only minutes behind 5th place. It was just, it was remarkable to see how tight it was and how little mistakes. Michal launched from the Simatosa that night. He had to run up the wrong way. It started getting katabatic at the wrong time of day. It was 3:00 in the afternoon. It should have been really pumping up from the west and coming in, and everything reversed. In fact, Nicola and who was with him, Rito, I think, there's that little church kind of thing up above the hut there, above the refugio, and they had to launch. The wind was coming down the canyon. This is hard to describe unless you've been up in there, but it's coming it's completely the wrong way. And so they've got a launch going uphill and then wing it downwind, and let the terrain fall away from them so they don't crash. And then it was working, and then they would get these climbs out. But Michal was he'd come in there 10 minutes behind those guys. Marcus Anders had just left, and he was going, how do I launch? And I said, well, these guys did it from here, but at that point it was way too strong. He couldn't even do that. So he had to ground handle for about 20 minutes going up the canyon, and then winged it off this cliff. And, it just didn't look like it was going to work. It looked like this was going to be katabatic all the way to the ground. And luckily he was able, as soon as he launched, he's just getting pummeled down. And then eventually the correct wind came in, and, that kind of stuff is just what's happening here. No forecast is predicting it. You wouldn't see it. It's way too early in the day to be katabatic. There's not ice and snow above us. So where's this coming from? And these guys have to deal with that constantly. But anyway, he got up high and went on glide, and apparently, took a bad line, and it was 10 spots. In his eventual ranking, it was 10 spots from where he'd been, that just the tiniest of little mistakes. And what a penalty.
So Gavin, a question I've been meaning to ask you since the end of the race is what happened with the tree? You mentioned it earlier, but what really happened that day?
I've had a lot of hairy experiences in the X-Alps, but this was probably the worst. Actually, it was so bizarre. So I hiked up in the snow to get up to this crazy cool position right underneath the turn point at the Dufour Spitz. So we were just outside of the cylinder, and I caught Rito and Nicola launching, and the video was incredible. It was beautiful. They had to do this kind of forward launch and run on flat snow. And then there was this totally vertical cliff, about 400, 150-meter cliff, 400-foot, absolutely vertical cliff. And, so their wing was up, and then they launched, and they did it perfectly. And I'm supposed to go live at 9. So this was about 8 o'clock. You were live, and the service up there was terrible. And I'm running around trying to find better than one bar. And as you know, my camera setup was basically this arm that was about 1.5 feet long with the iPhone out at the end of it. And it wasn't really fold awayable. So I had a bunch of trouble with this actually in the first day at Kitzbühel. I blew a launch because you really had to be careful doing a reverse launch because it's sticking out in front of your gear. And when you turn to go into launch position, if we weren't paying attention to it, it could wrap up in the opposite riser. And so now I have all this sorted, but at the time I was still kind of dealing with how to do this. But I'm hurrying because I really want to be in the air for the 9 o'clock show. And I can still see these guys. They're right there. And I want to get in the air because I can potentially fly with them for a whole bunch of kilometers towards the next turn point and into the Lakes District and all that stuff. And so I'm kind of rushing, but soon enough, I realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to go live. I don't have the coverage. So I've texted the team, listen, I'm just going to record. I'll use the GoPro on my helmet. I'll use the iPhone on my hip, and I'll just record. But the live's not going to work. There was no service back in there. And Tarquin, it was a class 1 launch. At that point, I didn't have to do the whole run and forward thing. At the top of the lift, there was this flat area, and there was this very gentle. It was ice and snow, but it wasn't that slippery, and it was very gradual. And there's nice air coming up perfectly. It wasn't crosswind. It wasn't too strong. It was just, I could just pull the wing up, check everything, turn, fly off. So the cliff now, I don't have to run off the cliff. The cliff is to my left side, and my ditch, in other words, if something goes wrong, I've got a nice ditch to the right, so this snowfield is all flat to my right. So I pull the wing up, and the first time doesn't work out, and I put it back down. And the wind is just coming in perfectly. So I pull the wing up again, check everything, looks great, turn, and now I'm and it's only about 20 feet before the cliff. And I'm doing my, shoulders nice down. I'm doing a nice kind of torpedo launch. And as soon as I get airborne, it's pulling me hard to the left. And I'm going, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm hitting to the right. So I know I've got something wrong on my left wing. So I slam the brakes, which makes me pull harder that way. And now I don't have my ditch. My ditch is to the right, and I'm flying hard to the left. And I look up, and and there's something. And I don't notice that it's actually down in front of me. The camera is through the risers on the left side. And so it's got that side of the wing all messed up, but I'm flying. And it's pulling me into this cliff wall, and it's 400, like I said, it's 400 feet, totally vertical. I don't have it. I can't spin it and get back to the snow. I can't fly to the right. It's pulling me. And so I've already got as much right brake as I can possibly have without spinning the glider to just fly sort of straight, but I'm flying into this cliff. And right before I hit the cliff, I just think, oh no. And I crack the right brake, and it's just enough to kind of move me enough away from the cliff that I don't splat directly into it, but the cliff tears my stabilo right out of the wing. So the wing hits the cliff, and the stabilo line just pulls right out of it, and it's just hanging down below. But that's kind of released a lot of the pull of the wing. So at least now with a lot of the right brake, I can fly straight and what's going on here. And I mean, it was really close to just pummeling down this cliff. It was as close as I've ever come to a really, really sketchy outcome. And so, but now I'm flying straight. The wing is just kind of, that side of the wing has no stabilo. So the wing is just kind of, but it's not cravated. It's okay. And I see my camera gears in here, so I can start pulling all that out of the riser. And in doing so, I break the end of the camera unit, so I can't use that phone. I just put it in my pocket and think, okay, I'll just go land. But then I realized actually the wing is flyable. It's not great, but it's just soft on that side. So it's hard to turn to the left. It makes thermaling to the right weird, but I'm safe. The wing is flyable. And so then I think, okay, well, I'm going to fly. My driver was driving around to Domodossola. So he's down in the Aosta Valley. He's driving around to Domodossola. Domodossola is 40K. The conditions are really good. And I think, okay, I'll fly to Domodossola. I'll land there. Maybe I can catch up with these guys. I couldn't see them anymore, but maybe I'll catch up with them and I'll get some footage. And so I start flying, and it's not great, but it's okay. And I get to the ridge above the Macagnaga Valley. So Monte Rosa's up on my right. I'm well past the Dufour Spitz now, and it's really turning on. It's 11 o'clock in the morning now, and it's gangbusters, and there's quite a bit of north wind. And so as I'm flying along the ridge down into the Macagnaga Valley, and I'd had this really interesting experience there in the 2021 race. That's where Bramfit did, pummeled his leg. He had that terrible landing there. And I had a really interesting, really fun. I didn't have a bad experience there, but it was really fun. That was my last night of the race in 2021. So, I'm kind of nostalgic and still thinking I could maybe catch these guys, but now it's really on. And now I'm not enjoying flying this wing nearly as much. And I think, okay, forget it. I'm not going to make it into the Domodossola Valley. I should just go land. There was a valley off to my right that was one of the feeders down to the Aosta. And so I call my supporter, my driver, this guy Jack, and say, hey, don't go around the corner, start coming up this valley. I'll send you a pin. But I'm going to try to land down here. And, I'm kind of thermaling, and I'm getting down, and I get to this area where a beginner pilot could have landed a wing. It just was, it was quite a tight valley, but there's big fields and no problem. But I'm in, little X-Alps mode. I think, oh, you know what? I should fly down this canyon as far as I can, because that's going to make it a shorter drive for Jack, and I can get going faster and go chase these guys. And so it's super narrow valley, and it's all treed. I've never been in this. I've never flown in this area. And I'm looking at my maps and going, oh, it's probably 20K to get to a place where this looks like it's not such a windy road and there might be a landing. But you learn in the X-Alps that there's always a landing. There's always a place you can put it down. So I just keep pressing. And now the wind is getting stronger. I'm basically flying into a Venturi, and the wind is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so my glide's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's all trees. It's just a river and trees. And okay, I don't need to, what am I doing? I should go land in a field. And so I turn around and start flying downwind, and I'm covering ground really fast, but I'm not going to make it back to where these good fields. It's a very steep canyon. And so I'm looking around a little bit desperately to find a decent landing. And there's one place there's all this kind of a village that's up on a hill that's got all these tiers with a lot of rock walls and a lot of power lines. And in an X-Alps mode, yeah, that's a landing, but I don't know. That's not great. But while I'm flying over that, just back down the canyon, lower, is a field that looks pretty good. It looks quite steep, but it looks pretty good. Okay, that's my LZ. So I fly back down, back into the wind towards that. And as I get in there, I had completely misjudged it. The decent looking field is a 45-degree slope. It's really steep, and it's grass. It's nice, but it's really steep, and it's facing away from the road. So the road's at the top of that, and it's steep like that. And it's surrounded by huge trees, really, really big, tall trees, and no problem. All I've got to do is do a big wing over and a big wing over, and let the wing go and fly up this hill. Do the fly on the wall thing that you're seeing Maxime and Patrick Von Kindle and Kriegel do all the time. And I've practiced this a lot. I've got that move. It's fine. So I do a big wing over to the right, and I go to do the big wing over to the left, and I have completely forgotten that I don't have a left wing. I don't have any authority on that side whatsoever. I mean, this whole flying down the canyon, I'm completely, my bandwidth taken up by finding an LZ and landing safely, and I forget that I've got a completely crippled wing. So I do this huge wing over to the right, which of course is going to give a lot of power and energy to the wing as I come down through the pendulum and come up to the other side. And I've got to have authority to bring that back now and do the whole fly on the wall bit. And I go to hit the left brake and lean, and there's nothing there. I'm flying dead straight. and right in front of me is this huge tree. It's about 80 feet off the ground. And I don't have a chance at doing anything else. I'm not going to stall the wing because then I'm just going to hit the deck. And so my only hope then is, oh, I hope this tree grabs me. I hope that the wing hangs in the tree. And luckily I had the momentum as I'm kind of coming down through the pendulum for the wing to get in the tree. And I just pendulum through the bottom. I don't hit anything, but the tree makes a terrible sound with the wing. So obviously I've done some damage to the wing, but I pendulum through, and it was so lucky. I pendulum back the other way, thinking, oh no, I hope the wing holds. And as I pendulum through, I kind of turn around, and there's another tree that's about 50 feet up, and I'm able to grab the top of that. That's literally just, the cartoon character that grabs at the top of a tree and it just sways back all over the place. And I'm in the very top of this thing and just woo, and do this whole wow. The tree kind of bends all the way down and comes back. It's, being on the end of a bungee cord type of deal. And eventually it kind of solidifies out, and I'm fine. Harness is fine. Wings up in the tree. And I call 112, our version of 911 in Europe, and immediately get this very nice lady on the call and, tell her the situation. And, hey, I think I'm going to need a tree kit, or somebody to come help me out of this tree. And that is hysterical because they don't speak English, and they put me on hold, and this all takes 15 minutes. And while this is happening, I've got her on speakerphone. While this is happening, I start getting out of my jacket and throwing it down and taking off I left my helmet on, but take off my buff because it's really hot. And I'm sweating profusely, and I'm kind of assessing the whole situation, and I'm barely able to stay in the tree because my wing is the riser on one side, especially, is really tight. And so I can't get out of the harness, and they're telling me, don't move. We need to come to you. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to climb down. And I'm going, yeah, but I'm hot. And this is really uncomfortable because I'm hanging in the harness weird. And long story short, I was able to hang up the phone eventually, and they said, emergency services are coming. And I'm talking to Jack, my driver, and I've given him the pin and told him what's going on. And it takes a long time, but eventually I'm able to kind of get enough slack on the harness to unclip the one side. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know if this is a safe thing to do because, I'm in this tree, I'm way off the ground still. I mean, if I fall, I'm in trouble, but the tree doesn't feel very stable, and I'm afraid it's may break the top of it off or something. But anyway, I was able to get the harness off, throw the harness down, basically unclip it from the wing, throw the harness down to the ground. And eventually I'm able to climb down out of the tree on my own. And the rest of the day was pretty hysterical. I waited for this Italian, the emergency services eventually do come, and they're adamant that I got to go to the hospital. There's no way I can be okay. And I know, listen, I'm totally fine. And so they put me in the ambulance, and they do, a blood. I don't think they did a blood draw, but they did, they did the whole blood pressure thing on me. And she said, wow, your blood pressure is perfect. It should be much higher because you should have adrenaline and be, oh no, you don't know me. I go through this stuff all the time. This is just another day of Gavin. I'm totally fine. It was like 120 over 80 or something. And so they signed me off, and it's all fine. I had to sign a bunch of paperwork that they could leave, and they leave, and a proper tree guy comes. He really knew what he was doing. And he goes to the top of this 80-foot tree and starts cutting stuff out and everything else. And then eventually I get my wing, but we're there all day. I think I did another report with you at one point. I went down, I found good internet in another little village, halfway down the road or 30 minutes down the road, and did a show, and it all worked out. And I was quite sheepish about the whole thing, so I didn't want the organization to know, because I didn't want them to know about, I didn't want them to worry about me, but everything was fine. I was given another wing by a Nivic dealer the next day, and I was able to get to the Tracime and tie in with Ellie when she came through, and fly with her basically all the way to the raft. So it was a little hiccup, but I was happy with how it worked out. It was actually really scary. It was not a nice situation. And, now I have all the gear now that my kit this time will be a lot tighter for flying. It'll be much easier to deal with.
Yeah. Wow. What a story, Gavin. I mean, I remember you saying something that day, you'd had a little bit of an epic, you'd had a little bit of a situation with a tree. And I was like, can you still make the live? That's the only thing I cared about, because I was in my own world of battling stuff. And you were like, yeah, I can make the live.
As we are.
We're on the live. Okay, right. What are our top 3 stories? Let's go. Kriegel at the lead or whatever. Ellie's here. We'll talk about the tree later. Wow. I mean, yeah, but that's always the big fear, isn't it? With anything to do with filming. I mean, I lost a friend last year. He was a paramotoring filmer, and he died in a midair. He's called Dan Burton. He was a great guy. And people, it's so dangerous if you've got any kind of camera equipment. That's so often the times when people get hurt. Sadly.
Yeah, you have to be really careful about it. I mean, I felt pretty stupid that day. I have to be honest. I learned from Will Gadd. My first really big film project was a Red Bull deal. The very first day walking up with him to launch was just, hey, you have to pretend, and for the next however long this expedition is going to take, it ended up taking 18 days, was just, the stuff we're doing is dangerous enough. You have to forget that these cameras are here. Just do your thing, and don't do anything for the cameras. And he basically was saying, I will not do this project with you if I see you do something for the cameras at any point, whether that's just an interview on the side of a glacier or anything. Just, you have to pretend that they're not here, because it gives you, they help you do things that aren't, you wouldn't normally do. And so you have to be, and from the filming perspective, I kept telling myself, going into this race, hey, this is way better than anything we've ever gotten. And so don't risk your life. You don't have to risk your life to get footage of anybody. And, so this was one of those where it was so tame. It was such a nice launch. It was, none of my hackles were standing up on my back that, that I was doing something risky. And so going to the next one, I'll have really nice gear, and it won't be an issue, because I've done a ton of that kind of filming where it's just get off the hill, be safe, get a lot of margin, then film. So
it reminds me of it reminds me of a funny story. I had a job a few years ago to film a Red Bull Ironman athlete, and I won't mention his name. I've sworn to secrecy. But I was filming him. He was doing these repeats. He was on the bike and he was going up and down this hill, and he was doing it like 10 times. And on the last one, he decided to do like a Superman maneuver, where you put your arms, in front, and then you're on the tri bars, and then your legs are kind of flat out behind you, horizontal. So you're basically horizontal coming down, flying. And of course, it was for the camera. He lost control and T-boned into the side of the road, and ended up with concussion. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with a concussion victim. They're a nightmare. It's like someone who's really, really drunk. He keeps repeating himself, confused. Where am I? Who are you again? What am I doing here? I need, and a kind of real stubbornness.
I'm fine. Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was trying to take him to the hospital. No. Cool. Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go. I'm like, no. Dude, get in the car. And in the end, I had to get his phone and call his wife, and just say, you need to speak to this guy and tell him to do as he was told. He was fine in the end. He didn't do so well in Kona a couple of weeks later, but
right.
It's been a blast reminiscing. And I hope I'm really already psyched for 2025, and hope that we can really improve on the learnings that we had this year, and I think really up our game with the live view in the air. Maybe, who knows, maybe I'll go live in the air as well at some stage.
There you go. Keep training, buddy. Keep training.
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
We're up against our hour here, but I do want to ask you before we go, this Bear Grylls thing. It sounds fascinating. What's that all about?
Well, okay, I knew you'd ask me about that. So back in the day, we're up against the time, but I used to write for a newspaper called The Telegraph here in London, and I used to be one of those journalists. I was writing a lot about explorers and adventurers doing firsts in the poles on mountains, but I really cared about the facts. You'd get these stories about people who youngest person to hike to the North Pole, and then you kind of look at the detail, and they've only gone the last degree. So that really used to annoy me, and I was quite hot on challenging people's claims. And it was in 2007, and Bear had done this high altitude paramotor flight. And as it happened, I was in Kathmandu at the time, and I bumped into Gilo Cardozo, who was there in Kathmandu, and I was like, oh wow, how did it go? How did the expedition go? And he goes, yeah, we did it. It was amazing. Blah blah. I thought, oh great, and let's see the proof. And I was, I was literally like, kind of like, yeah, let's see. And he was like, he suddenly got really defensive and was like, well, you know,
Well, you don't believe
affronted
us?
that I'd asked him. Yeah, exactly. And he said, it'll all be in the TV show, you know, in 6 months' time. I was like, well, okay. And then fast forward about 6 months, I called Bear. He wasn't really a close friend, but we knew each other socially, and we had some friends in common. And, you know, I called him up and I basically challenged him about the flight, because at the time there was a bit of confusion whether he had claimed to have flown over Mount Everest or just above Mount Everest. I think finally he settled on, or it was reported that he flew above Mount Everest, certainly above, 28,000 feet, above the height of Everest. And I challenged him on that. And he said to me, but Tarquin, you wouldn't write that. You're my friend. And you know, the funny thing is, a year later, you know, Bear, this was just before Man v Wild went mad, and you know, Bear is on every billboard from Los Angeles to London. And you know, at the end of the day, someone sort of said to me, only about 5 people really care about these things. But it does bring me to the interesting thing. What someone said to me, well, it was actually Richard Meredith Hardy, who has flown a microlight over Mount Everest. You know, he said, you know, there are 3 things in this game. There are records, there are firsts, and there are personal bests. I mean, a record is not a record unless, you know, you've got the authority there stamped, you know, to document it. You know, you've got someone with a clipboard, you know, whether it's a FAI, triangle, you know, you've got to jump through various hoops. So Bear was never going to qualify on the kind of record, because I think that there's some arcane rule you've got to take off from a certain altitude and all this stuff. Then there are firsts, and with any of these things, you know, you need to, it's not good enough just to say that you've done it. If you're a free diver, you don't get the record until you've pulled the card, you've done the OK sign, and there are other things as well you've got to do. So that's that. I think for the record, the FAI still credits Raymond Marillas with the paramotoring altitude record, which he set in 2009, and that was 7,800 meters. I think it's still out there written that Bear flew above Mount Everest, but certainly no.
That could be Camp 1, right? I mean, how do you define above? It's a big mountain.
He said at the time his GPS wasn't working, which is unfortunate. That's kind of bad luck. But certainly. Certainly, there's no one has ever flown over Mount Everest in a paramotor. So yeah. Well, I think one has to be careful what one says, doesn't you know? But
yes, absolutely.
Certainly, the flying over Mount Everest, you know, is yet to be done in a paramotor.
Yeah.
But
cool.
that's
more amazing things to do.
But funnily enough, I know that his safety guy is in my paragliding club, guy called Scott, and we got chatting. And, I chatted with Bear a little bit on social media this year, just saying hi and exchanging pleasantries, because we didn't really talk much after that. And he sort of let it be known that in a way he was grateful for the experience of me sort of challenging him. And really I was quite polite about it, and it was quite civil, because it prepared him for what followed the following year. There was an absolute shitstorm where he was accused of, like staying in hotels or kind of faking it on Man v Wild, which was really stupid, actually, because actually that was a TV show, and it's kind of what you do when you're making a TV show. You do stay in hotels, and I have met people who work for Bear, and they all say he does his own stunts. On that stuff, he's I don't think you can question what he does. I mean, he does some pretty ballsy stuff, but on that little high altitude. Was it or wasn't it a flight above or over Mount Everest? I think we're still yet to get really to the bottom of exactly what he did, which is a shame, because whatever he did, whatever he and Gilo did was amazing. Cool. I mean, it's still cool. Yeah. It still paved the way, experimental. And Gilo's an interesting character. In fact, funny enough, I was talking to a colleague of mine. We used to write about active sports, on the paper, and so I did one on paramotoring, and my guy, we're coming into land, he doesn't see the tree because my head is in front of his head, and I'm classic passenger. Don't say anything. He's the pilot. Don't say anything. And at the last minute, he sees this tree. We bank hard to the right, and we end up landing on a dry stone wall. But it was okay. We dusted ourselves down, and he bought me lunch, and I promised not to write about it. but my colleague did a year or two before or after, I forget which, but he did a story on Gilo, and he's never flown in his life. Gilo puts him in a paramotor and says, right, off you go, and just starts talking. This is what you do. And, you just know you'd never do this. Gilo's probably only about, I don't know, 20, 21 years old. And this guy absolutely freezes in terror, shits his pants, everything, near-death experience. And luckily he survives. But this episode, he then wrote a novel, and this novel's been published. And the central character dies in a paramotoring incident. And he describes this incident of taking off where they... Yeah, absolutely. He's up in the air and just convinced he's going to fly into some electricity pylons, and you wouldn't do that now, would you?
No, I'd like to think I wouldn't.
Yeah. So there's my Bear Grylls story.
Good stuff. Fantastic, Tarquin. Great catching up with you. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad you pitched this, and hope you all listening enjoyed it. But thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really enjoyed it, Gavin. I can't wait to see you again in 2025.
Yeah, man. Can't wait too. See you, bud.
See ya.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.